Yeah, well, I'm Jordan. As Jacob said, this was my idea, so I thought that we'd start off this podcast essentially by providing an introduction to just some of the key philosophical ideas and thinkers that kind of underpin Scorpion movement as a whole and that have had a big influence on us. I mean, us three here, we have Jacob, myself, Jordan, and FlyingCabala. We have diverse interests, and our philosophical interests, are not completely identical, but there are definitely some common areas of overlap and specific thinkers that I think have influenced us tremendously. We can talk about Plato, Julius Evola, people like Oswald Spengler, and these various other thinkers that I think are relevant to this critique of modernity that we put forth. That's pretty central to our entire movement. So I thought I'll pass it over to FlyingCabala here because he's had a pretty interesting sort of intellectual and philosophical transformation over the years. I mean, you got into Evola at the age of, I mean, just a couple of
15.
years ago. I think 2020, I think, right? Because you said that you read Revolting into the Modern World, and then that book just really impacted you, and then that kind of got you into more intellectual pursuits. So if you could expand on that, I think that's a great way to get started here.
Oh yeah, exactly. So I'll just introduce myself briefly. I'm FlyingCabala. So I would say, interested in traditionalist philosophy as well as Neoplatonic philosophy. Generally speaking, I like to put labels on my own, like Weltanschauung or like worldview. But I would say that at least since a year or two, I have considered myself philosophically to be Neoplatonist. I started with philosophy at a fairly early age, I would say, because, I mean, I got into like right-wing circles when I was about 14 and 15, and through there I was able to discover Julius Evola. So I obtained his work and read it when I was 15 years old, and I would say Julius Evola basically, gave me a view into another world. I mean, I guess he was kind of the rabbit hole in my life because, when I initially ordered his work and got it, I was expecting, especially judging by the definition and description that Wikipedia gives of him, just be kind of like a right-wing thinker, but his deep thinking actually goes much deeper than that. I'm not saying like he's a perfect thinker and like that there were no blemishes like involved him, but I'd say like he's probably one of the best thinkers of the 20th century, and certainly a deep one, like with a lot of like allusion, reference to tradition.
I mean, discovering Evola led me down so many rabbit holes because I think we've all had a pretty strong interest in politics for sure. I mean, for me, it started it actually started really with the 2016 presidential election. I mean, I think that was a key watershed kind of moment for all of us because that got me interested in politics. It's just all that everyone was talking about around me. You know, my family members, my friends at school, and then that's when I started to realize, there is this sort of deep division in this country within different, political factions. But for a while, I couldn't really conceive of politics as anything beyond this pretty simplistic dichotomy of liberal versus conservative, and do you believe in this amount of government intervention in the economy or Y amount of government intervention in the economy? It was a very materialistic perspective, and I couldn't really transcend that paradigm. But then discovering thinkers like Evola, just seemed so radical to me at the time. Like that just opened the door to so much interesting philosophy for me because he rejected, and I think because I want to talk about third positionist politics here because, Keith Woods, he made a really interesting video 2 years ago about, the Nazgul vortex. He said, is the Nazgul vortex coming? Is this actually what used to be some fringe, political movement actually rising into the mainstream? And I think it is. And I think the recent developments have made that very clear. And in order to understand those developments, you need to understand Evola because he rejected not only liberalism, free market capitalism, but also Marxism, and sort of offered this unique perspective where he says, as long as we're talking about, these materialist concepts, matters of economic relations, class relations, production, GDP, things along those lines, were so far off from the real issues that, I mean, it's just not even close. And so he
characterized modernity, in other words.
Yeah. That's sort of the defining, some of the defining features of modernity. It's very materialistic worldview. And so when he had these spiritual and ancient, mystic, and even some occult elements mixed in, I think occultism is pretty important here. That just kind of blew my mind. That's actually what led to me making a presentation on him in philosophy class a couple of years ago. That definitely attracted the interest of the class, because everyone else just kind of picked the most normie philosophers out there. I mean, I have nothing against people like John Locke and Thomas Hobbes, but it's obvious that they didn't really have a genuine interest in these thinkers. They just selected them based off of the list that the teacher provided, and so people were kind of just sleeping through the entire class. But I brought up Evola, and we got into sex, magic, and occultism, and all these out there topics.
Yeah, that's when they really started paying attention.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, just for Gen Z, just say, oh yeah, sex, magic, and other more extreme topics. But I think some people kind of dismiss, like, if you look up Evola in these, I guess, more normie or mainstream right and left-wing circles, a lot of people dismiss him as this sort of mystic or like fantasist or just strange, like, wizard type figure. But I mean, these topics are still important. I wrote a whole essay on this actually about the intersection between occultism and politics, especially far-right reactionary politics. That's the newest video. What's the first video that we actually have in the Scorpion Movement channel? Mm-hmm. Like, we're saying that this intersection is influencing, world geopolitics. I talked about Alexander Dugin in that essay. I definitely want to get to Dugin at some point. But I think, because FlyingCabala, I know that you're very interested in the critiques of the sort of materialist philosophy. I think if we could delve into that, that'd be interesting. Because that is kind of the philosophy, this materialist and, empiricist, sort of atheist worldview does kind of underpin modernity.
Oh yeah,
and I think Platonism, because we mentioned Plato as well, and yeah, Plato was definitely a key influence on Evola. I think Platonism, and especially Platonist metaphysics, can sort of provide an alternative to this. So,
oh yeah, I think Platonism was an influence on Evola, but probably not like a chief one. But definitely one among them. He does like cite Plato and Plotinus like throughout his works.
Yeah.
You mentioned like Evola being opposed to Marxism and free market capitalism. To kind of add on to that, in Revolt Against the Modern World, or in another work, not exactly sure, but he basically puts Marxism and capitalism kind of on the same tier. Like, so to speak, like he basically thinks of them as equivalent because they're both materialistic systems that are like removed from tradition and like they're a divine realm, like, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think there's
actually like in Revolt Against the Modern World, he also goes into the theory. I'm assuming most viewers are going to be familiar with the four-partite caste system of Hinduism. So they had the Brahmins, and then the warrior caste, then the merchant caste, and the farmer caste. I guess to basically summarize what he discusses quite a bit in his book Revolt. He basically sees the history of modernity as power being passed to those classes. So he thinks that during the Golden Age, power was held by the Brahmins, and then the Silver Age, power was held by the warrior caste. So Alexander the Great, for instance, military chiefs, so to speak, being in charge of power. And then with free market capitalism, so from about the 17th century on to hitherto. We have the merchant class kind of in charge of power. They control all the financial organs of government. Then he sees Marxism as basically the lowest caste. like the working and subsequently, I guess, dirtiest class. Yeah, taking control of power, because I mean Marxism is ultimately like egalitarian and focused on the working class. So I guess he kind of sees Marxism as the end of history.
And I think, which is actually funny because there's this prominent liberal thinker, international relations, named Francis Fukuyama, who also has this book called The End of History. You know, he's coming at it from the complete opposite perspective of Evola. And I'm actually in the process of writing an essay where I essentially refute the thesis that Fukuyama puts forth in that book. But I wanted to bring that up because in The End of History, Fukuyama states essentially that, look, now that the Cold War is over and the Soviet Union has collapsed, we're entering the reign where liberal democracy is pretty much entrenched as the political system worldwide. It is the dominant system, the sort of liberal capitalist hegemony, and it's not going away anytime soon. And because of this, this ties into something called Golden Arches theory, which essentially states, I mean, it's in reference to this idea that the two countries with McDonald's will not go to war with each other, but it states, liberal capitalist democracies are generally more peaceful and they don't go to war with each other, they don't invade each other. So I think it's kind of a naive concept. But the reason I bring up Fukuyama is because I think Evola kind of has the complete, opposite stance on
that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and because you talked about this cyclical conception of history, right, and the ideas that he borrowed from Hinduism. Well, what he borrowed from Hinduism, which I think most people, this term is actually becoming much more popular recently, is the idea that we live in the Kali Yuga, which in Hinduism is the Dark Age. And it's this period of spiritual, cultural,
decay,
metaphysical sort of degradation and decay. And so I think what he says is we're actually going to be seeing a lot more sort of violence and chaos